So it was about 1 year ago I properly decided to start learning Japanese. Um, if you've watched my previous videos, you would know exactly what influenced me to develop a bit more of an emphasis on language learning as a whole. And my obsession with it at that time was more than it had ever been in the past. So I really wanted to actually get something out of this language. And at the current time, I think 1 year ago, I was still using an app called Pimsleur. And I think it was like a month or two later after using it, I just didn't feel much progress. So I was once again in this weird situation of always starting a new method, using a new app, trying to learn a language in a more effective way. And then, eventually I just end up getting to another position where, yeah, I'd have to learn a new method after that, and it was just on and on and on. It was really annoying. But I believe it was one night in April or May last year, I watched this incredibly important video on acquisition and the concept of acquisition in the context of languages and how we are able to make sense of languages, and it piqued my interest. I'll link the video in the description. I actually link in like most of these videos just because it's a really fascinating video, just in case you've never heard of the concept of acquisition before. I highly implore you to go check that out. It's by a creator called Jeff Brown, but that's not, for some reason, that's not his channel name. Anyways, back onto the point. So, after that point, I was really just fascinated in the idea of how I can use acquisition in my life. After that, I watched some more videos specific to Japanese, and I found another creator called Matt vs. Japan who discussed immersion, who discussed acquisition and comprehensible input and all these concepts that I'd seen on that video from Jeff Brown. So I was like, oh, he really knows, how to do this. And it's as simple as literally me watching whatever content I want to within the target language and having flashcards on that and all that. I didn't have to struggle with flashcard creation because I was also watching another YouTuber at the time called Jouzu Juls, and that's when I first heard about the tool Migaku particularly, and there was also Yomi-chan, but I've never used that before. I just decided to purchase Migaku, use it alongside immersion, and start watching my first anime, and that's how I learnt a lot, or acquired a lot of Japanese quite quickly. It was very interesting, it was very fun to be able to, engage, like it's literally engaging in any content that you want to watch. And particularly if like there's an interesting story, which I'd always been fascinated in, like good stories. And yeah, it was very surprising to me that a lot of Japanese anime had that. I had a bit of a stigma towards anime as a whole before I even started immersing it in it, but that's still besides the point. It's just like you have that freedom of being able to watch whatever or engage with whatever content you want in order to be able to gain new vocabulary within that language. And still to this day, looking back, I believe within the Japanese catalogue there's the most interesting and like purely deep, at least from my experience, like in comparison with Thai shows and Thai films, and then Chinese shows, Chinese films, Vietnamese shows, Vietnamese films. These are just the other languages that I've immersed in before. I'd still say that Japanese has by far, at least personally for me, the most interesting and engaging content. I've been able to watch animes over and over and over again, like Death Note and Jujutsu Kaisen, and I still never get enough of them. They're super interesting to me, and it's a way in where I can engage with the language and continuously build upon what I already know. However, at the time, and I didn't realize this, but when I was using Migaku, I was quite slow. That wasn't the main problem, but like when I go through flashcards every day, even 20 new flashcards a day became like really stressful for me. I think that's just because when I was creating flashcards, I kind of was creating them on a whim without actually having greater affinity to the word. And the worst thing is, I didn't understand the logic of the words and the logic of the language. I didn't understand the grammar, and I was going into a language that's completely different from English in every respect. I had no idea what constituted a noun, what constituted an adjective or a verb within Japanese. All I heard was that, oh, well, the verb comes at the end. That was the only piece of grammar information I had going into immersion with Japanese. So for a while, actually, I think it was for about 2 months of immersing, I was kind of getting nowhere. Like, I felt like I was really enjoying the process with watching a new anime and engaging with the story. But in terms of actually acquiring information, there was a bit of a barrier between being able to fully comprehend what was going on and the use case of the vocabulary that I was learning. So yeah, for example, basically every verb that I studied, I couldn't understand why there was like a noun counterpart of that and like what constituted that. It made no sense to me, and I wasn't able to come to the logical conclusion because I've never thought in this language before. So I didn't know what to do. All I'd heard from Ant vs. Japan was to just watch and immerse, and I heard quite negative connotation between like grammar books and grammar study, and like it's not connected to the whole idea that when you were a baby you didn't have to consciously study grammar to be able to use it. However, yeah, it wasn't before long, I think 2 months after or 3 months after initially beginning immersion and facing yet another problem, almost thinking that, oh shit, well, immersion's fun, but it's like, am I actually getting anywhere with this? Am I able to understand the language anymore? And the answer was no, unfortunately. So it was a time after I'd gone on a little trip to Thailand and then become obsessed with Thai, feeling like I'd be able to solve the problem by just studying another language. And yeah, it was a really good time because I'd just been to Thailand. I was really interested in the culture and wanting to be able to speak with the lovely people there. So for a while I think it was just for a month, I ended up focusing on Thai primarily. I don't think I did many of my Japanese flashcards, and if I did, it was like maybe twice or 3 times a week, definitely not every day. At that time, I found out about another tool called Language Reactor, which is basically like the more, for lack of a better word, like the ghetto version of Migaku, where it's applicable to far more languages. So that was really helpful upon finding about that and using Anki with that. But I don't know what happened. I think after about a month of consistently studying Thai, and I'm talking like I loved this language, I was obsessed over it, and I was studying it for like 3 hours every day. Even when I had work, I was waking up at like 3 or 4 in the morning just to get immersion in. That's how like obsessed I was over this. There was like, I don't know what happened. I think the fundamental interest of immersion, it just became like the shows that I was watching was like really boring in comparison with Japanese. So I think it was after about 2 or 3 days of realizing this and not really wanting to engage with boring content, or feeling like no matter what I'd do, I'd be engaging in boring content without actually understanding that the main problem was my understanding and comprehension over the grammar system. But I'll get to that in a second. I don't know what I was doing. I think I just searched up on YouTube once again. That's actually where I end up going whenever I have a problem with languages, is I just go to YouTube and I'm like, whatever, I'll just watch some videos. And I think I was watching some videos from Jouzu Juls, and there was this one really, really impactful video. I'd say it's probably one of the most important videos in regards to language acquisition that I've ever watched. I'll also link that in the description. And where a lot of the mindsets, I think, instilled into me by someone like Matt versus Japan, with like his pure immersion approach, was like really ingrained within me, and I never considered, going on YouTube to find out that, like, actually everything I'm immersing in, there's a structure and there's grammar behind it. All I need to do is just understand that. And how do I understand that? Well, I need to watch videos, I need to read about it. I found the easiest way for me in my position was to watch videos about it, and I think possibly within a different video, it might have been in another video from what I was initially referencing, but he brought up a certain creator who he claimed to have drastically assisted in his knowledge of comprehending Japanese. And this was completely new to me, because everything else that I've been watching from him was kind of articulating the immersion approach. But yeah, he referenced this one creator called Dolly, and I was kind of interested. I was just like, oh, well, she's gone into a lot of these concepts and whatnot and allowed me to understand something along the line. So I was just like, whatever, I'll watch Dolly. I'm not gonna lie, when I clicked on like the first video, it was kind of creepy, because if you've ever watched a Dolly video before, it's literally just like this fucking weird ass doll. So it's a bit of a thing to get used to. However, the content and the actual information on display is peak. It is like the best stuff I've ever learnt about in regards to Japanese, and generally as a concept, teaching me the power of understanding the grammar and connecting it with the vocabulary I'm getting exposure to via immersion. They go hand in hand, and particularly as a beginner, through having an online resource in the form of like a creator or YouTube videos, from other creators or whatnot, articulating certain grammar points that you would have never thought there was like a formal structure behind it, but there is, changes your whole perspective on language. So I'd watched maybe, I think, 2 or 3 videos, and my whole consensus of the language had changed. I was like, oh my goodness. So you're telling me that this is a logical particle, and that's what it does within the sentence. Like, I was learning stuff about the gut particle, for example. I learned that the what particle is actually not a logical particle, whereas the gut particle is, and it's always present within basically every logical sentence in Japanese, even if it doesn't like get spoken, or it's not written down, or however you're consuming the information. Like, it's always there in the background, which was like, what the fuck? Is that even a thing that's possible in English? Like, that's something like, that's a completely different philosophical worldview and use case of a concept in the form of communication, to where it's like, how could you even conceive that and understand that by yourself? How could you come to the conclusion just by doing immersion that there's this fucking secret thing doing something at all times throughout all logical sentences in Japanese, whether it be in the sentence or in the background, it's always there, which is crazy to me. Simple concepts like that, and then learning more about verbs and their ability to conjugate, and theoretically they're not called conjugations, but I don't know what Q or Dolly was referring to them as, because basically like they like undergo this change in where you can like theoretically add other verbs to it, but it's like you wouldn't use those verbs by themselves. I could go on a whole ass tangent, but like this was stuff that I'd never thought about before. It allowed me to comprehend and acquire more information via immersion, and it just made the whole process far better, you know. And I was enjoying Japanese again. I watched like a video or two. Oh, no, maybe like an episode or two of like anime, and then I was just like, oh shit, actually I'm going back to Japanese. So yeah, unfortunately I was very back and forth with languages, and you know, that only lasted for a while before I started like doubting my whole decision to try and acquire Japanese at all. But that's a bit of like an unrelated issue. Needless to say, I'm not studying the language anymore. I probably might again in future, just because it's very fascinating to me. Even if I'm not able to use the language, I think it would just be really cool to understand it and like expound. Like that's something that's always going to be in my mind. Obviously there's the whole concept of if you don't use it, you lose it. So if I have a foundation in the language, I don't want to completely lose it. So I'd probably have to engage in something Japanese related here and there to sustain my knowledge of the language. But yeah, I guess it just depends on my use case of it. You know, that's one thing with language which is really interesting to me, is like I can engage with people in business conditions, you know, who possibly can only speak Japanese, or in future, like if I decide to study Mandarin again and acquire that and I'm able to speak it fluently, it's like I could engage with like in business practices to people who I never would have otherwise if I didn't develop that skill. And that's like an extra purpose on top of me wanting to even study languages to begin with. So there's always something I feel like I can get out of a language. And particularly like the bigger languages, more popular ones. But like at the moment I'm studying a relatively niche language by comparison. It's still not like niche, like only like 3 million people. Thailand, I believe, has between 70 mil to 80 mil people within it. I can't remember the specific number. So there's more than enough people to justify learning the language, in my opinion. And yeah, I love the culture, so that's my reasoning for going after the language at the moment. As of recording, you know, I cannot fucking understand my back and forth desire to just go between languages, and I'm sure if you've ever used something like Duolingo before, that's what you'll get used to, is just like learning one language for a little bit and then not understanding it, the whole process becoming painful, and thinking that you can alleviate the stress by switching up. And that never fucking happens, I swear. And I used to do that so much. I needed to just take a break and really clarify my purpose with language as a whole. At least, you know, from this point, and where actually it was, I believe, 3 months ago where I finally decided upon wanting to go after Thai, not Japanese, not Mandarin, not anything else, not Vietnamese. I think I studied Vietnamese for like about 2 days, and then I was like, oh, never mind. So yeah, I went all over the place, and thinking that like the language swap is it's the language's fault or whatever, and why you're not enjoying the process isn't exactly the case. Yeah, it's just a matter of being able to comprehend the information that's presented before you, because that inherently is a challenge to your mind. So if you're constantly immersing in something, trying to force that acquisition to take place where it just won't, because it's like the language is not, unless you're purely immersing in N+1, which most of you, if you want that enjoyment factor, you'd probably just want to watch something that you're interested in over always needing to be like, okay, well, I'm watching Peppa Pig and now I'm going to watch this other fucking kids show and all that to build up the fundamental knowledge. Honestly, it just depends on your position. But even if I watch like Japanese Peppa Pig, for example, there's still grammar concepts that I would have needed to come across and study consciously about outside of immersion to get a greater connection with how the language is used. Otherwise, I cannot replicate it, and I cannot comprehend it. How can I replicate it if I can't comprehend it, So it's a really important thing to involve with your immersion journey if you're immersing right now or want to engage with a language. It's really important to just have that extra grammar study. I think this is more of a conceptual thing than just saying, okay, we'll go do grammar study, because it depends on your situation and if you actually need it. If there's a fundamental disinterest with the language and you can't pinpoint what it is, maybe it's just your capacity to understand it. So where you can't logically and mindfully be able to come to the conclusion of what the problem is, which was my problem. I couldn't find out what wasn't clicking for me. It was really good for me at that time to be able to then go on YouTube and come across Dolly and come across grammar and structure behind a language such as Japanese, and understand that actually for this whole time I've had problems with languages. It's because I haven't understood them or put myself in a position in where I can acquire new information. It doesn't make sense to me. So how can it make sense to me? I can consciously learn the concepts. Yes, that's not acquisition per se, but because it's relevant, you might as well fucking call it acquisition, because your mind will want to fucking know that information, like, far more. You've put yourself in the position in where your mind is almost craving any tool to make sense of what you're currently immersing in. And if you go from learning something consciously back to immersion and acquiring new concepts, then yeah, I guess you could say you're consciously pointing it out. But then it just becomes acquired because you're getting that constant repetition to it. It's not like you've had to study this thing and then constantly restudy that. Like, you're observing it. It's being fucking used. So yeah, I think it's just a good concept to keep in mind. Using YouTube is my primary source. Like, I haven't needed to use anything else for assistance, particularly right now in my position, just searching up about Thai grammar. I particularly only watch this one channel called I Get Thais for anyone interested, and possibly learning Thai watching this. I highly doubt it. I feel like I'm the only one. But yeah, I'll make sure to link that in the description. Dolly as well. The video from Jeff Brown, Jouzu Juls, maybe Matt vs. Japan as well. Because even though there has never been a perfect perspective from any specific individual, or I'm not replicating completely what they're doing. At least on a conceptual basis, I feel like I can resonate more with Jouzu Juls and maybe Dolly in regards to language now, from my clarification for things, language related. But that's not to say that other creators on YouTube, other channels, haven't greatly assisted in my clarity over language acquisition as a whole, because it's far better, far better, far more enjoyable, far more easily available, and just interesting as a concept to be able to enact in your own position than to fucking go onto a language learning app and get bored and then switch languages and think it's the language that's the fault. No, it's the grammar, it's your capacity to understand the language, and it's the lack of understanding that it's like, well, if you're just doing this, to me, that's boring, you know, to not be able to engage with something and where I can see like people speaking and using the language. I love to watch people speaking and telling interest, like expressing interesting information. I don't like to, not to say that I don't like to read it at all, but it's like I'm on that like super beginner level with a language. If I'm watching, if I'm using Duolingo, what's interesting about the beginner sentences of fucking, I drink milk, I eat apple, I do this, I do... Like, that's not interesting. I'm sorry, to me it's not interesting. If it's interesting to you, keep fucking using Duolingo. But I implore you, that immersion would be far more of an effective way, you know, with everything. Like, it's just freeing, you know? So even if you were to learn the exact same fucking words, the exact same sentences, if a fucking character in a show or something that you're watching ends up saying, I eat apple, or I'm eating an apple, and all this shit, like, there will be a greater chance for you to actually retain that information, and your capacity to personalize that in the form of like flashcard creation, you know, and tracking those words, than you'd ever get. There's far more freedom, and it's far more personally involved, and you're engaging in more senses, and thus the information is just going to be retained more often than not in comparison with something like Duolingo. I always use Duolingo as an example. I think that's just because of my connection with the tool, and I guess Pimsleur as well, but because that's audio based, it's like, outside of like the useless and redundant words that are fucking used, or not useless, just because everything has its use, everything has its purpose. However, maybe the purpose just isn't as important to me in my current position, and that's also another thing, is to understand, depending on your level, like what is relevant to you, what would you get the most out of paying attention to right now and studying right now. So yeah, I think that's all I have to really cover, was just for Japanese particularly, you know, cue it Dolly, very, very important creator for me. And if you're studying Japanese as well, which, depending on how I title this video, I still am not clear about that. You know, you might be, or you might be interested in the Japanese language. Definitely check out Cue Dolly, and I'll link her playlist on Japanese grammar structure. It's pretty good to watch that alongside having immersion as well. At least for something like Japanese, I'd say it's like 1-on-1 ratio at the start, maybe for the first 2 weeks or whatnot, and where you'll like watch an episode of anime, and then after that you can watch like a Cue Dolly video, and then go back to the anime. You'll see the concepts being used that like she's brought up, and then it's just like back and forth and expounding upon that. Don't go too crazy with the grammar, because it's just like, with time you end up acquiring the information anyway. Don't worry about needing to study all the grammar, because the thing is, the more important thing is actually immersion. So it's best to have like 1 or 2 concepts, new concepts in mind every day, immerse in it, be able to build a connection, and then the next day you're just going to automatically immerse and get exposure to those concepts, so you don't need to consciously study them as much. And then, you know, because it's the next day, you can focus on another concept or whatever. Don't like go too crazy with it to where it feels like kind of like too much for you. Honestly, like, you're able to portion shit very well with language immersion, the whole acquisition method, I guess. You don't need to immerse for any set time, a day or whatnot. For me, like a rule of thumb is like between 30 minutes to like an hour at least. And then I also have like, depending on the day, it'll be like between 10 to 20 new flashcards plus the old ones that I review. And with Thai at my given point in time, not to say that I don't have any grammar to learn, because I'm sure I do. It's just I can't pinpoint that out. So until I'm able to pinpoint that there might be a problem and search more about it, like grammar study every day is not necessary. And that's something that you'll feel is like after you've kind of come out the beginner phase, grammar study won't be as necessary. It depends on the language. If it's Japanese, you'll probably still need to learn more because it's like, it's so fucking different from English. Just trust me right now. To think that I could have gotten through Japanese just by immersing in it. Oh, just by immersing. Don't worry, I'll just randomly be able to understand all these completely foreign concepts and worldviews that do not connect, that do not align in where I can logically come to the conclusion of it within a reasonable time. Yeah, maybe if you want to fucking study the language for the rest of your life and still not understand it because you're in such like a mind frame as to where it's like a sin to ever fucking engage with grammar information, whether that be in the form of a video, whether that be in the form of like reading it. I'd be more careful though with like reading it in the form of grammar books, because at least for Japanese, I don't think books like Genki really do good service in terms of thinking in the language. That's not my own personal opinion. That's just based off of like Dolly, I believe, but I don't think she called out Genki specifically. It's just like the general idea of grammar books don't actually fundamentally understand the structure of the language and try to like make everything, what would she say, a hongo. So tries to like make the language into this English-ified version for English native speakers to be able to understand using English concepts, but that's not how the language works, and you can't study the language like that either. At least for Japanese, everything becomes a bit more specific. With Thai, it was like really easy. I just searched up about certain concepts and then you kind of just see it, because the only people really giving information are the people who can speak English and are native Thai, speakers, or, just Thai, ethnically. So, yeah, anyways, that's, I think, all I want to cover in this video today. If you are interested in this type of content, please subscribe. If you like this video, if it gave you value, please give it a like, or do anything to express/show appreciation. I hope I have given you value, though. Anyways, this has been Ark Languages, Arkin. However you want to address me. I'll see you in the next one.